Uh, Today, I want to introduce a mystic you may know, but a mystic that's going to give us some gifts uh, for the next few weeks, Meister Eckhart. He was a 14th century a German mystic in the Rhineland. He was a Dominican priest, and he was just the way things go. I wasn't planning on reading much during my 6 weeks of recovery that I've done, but fell into going back into some old uh, uh, sermons of Meister Eckhart, and then gee, it just was very deep. And so I said, I want to teach on this. I want to give this the gift. Now, the guy lived about 650 years ago. So what light can he shed on us now? And in this community, I think it has a real relevance to a community of people like us. Uh, uh, his life spanned the late 13th century and the early 14th century. You may know a book that won an award some years ago by Barbara Tuchman. It was called A Distant Mirror. And that distant mirror was the 14th century, which Eckhart just, you know, um, was like a supernova in that century. And he wasn't the only one. It was a very dark time. And I want to just sort of give you an idea of Tuchman's book, and which I read some years ago, and how much like the 14th century, the late 20th century, and the early 21st century really is. So we're really in a time where uh, Eckhart can speak to us and be relevant. Also, Eckhart was excommunicated. He died. He was on trial and was excommunicated, and all his sermons and even his scholarly theological teachings were put on the index. So for about 550 years thereabouts, nobody even knew he existed, including Dominicans. Matthew Fox was 15 years a Dominican when he discovered Eckhart, and primarily was one of the people who brought his Eckhart to me. He translated all the sermons, but so he had disappeared for more than a millennium. Nobody even knew he existed, and then he was discovered. Uh, most most Dominicans never knew who he was. Almost all of them. Now, so let's just look at four things that will give us a context for what we're going to be working with in weeks to come on Eckhart. He is a mystic for today, if there ever was one. His stuff is not dated at all. And then I'll end with before we go into sitting a Christmas poem that was basically inspired by Eckhart. So first of all, in the 14th century, well, really the late 12th, 13th, but then really into the 14th century, there was, first of all, cultural and climate change. The cultural change was the feudal life of the medieval manor with the lords and all that stuff was sort of falling apart. Young people were leaving the manor and going to towns, and then these towns got bigger and the population was increasing, and then the towns became cities like Paris. Paris was the most important city really in the 14th century, European city. The monasteries were giving way to the universities. You didn't have to go to be a monk to learn to get educated. Now the University of Paris being the premier place where you could go to, secular place, and you could learn theology. Meister Eckhart followed Aquinas as the master of theology at the University of Paris. And well, back when we had only one pope, the 14th century had as many as three at one time. So that was really a kind of corruption was unbelievable. But he was the head of the Master of Theology at University of Paris, which is probably the second most important role and position in Christendom next to the Pope. Well, then we had two popes, and by the end of the thing, three popes. It was all sort of falling apart, changing. Climate-wise, we had in the early 14th century, the Little Ice Age, uh, where everything got real cold, and the Baltic Sea, salt water actually froze over twice in the 14th century. And because of this ice age that came out of nowhere, uh, crop yields were down, uh, population was up, crop yields were down. So there was a lot of hunger and scarcity. And of course, just like now, during these times, the rich get richer. And so they jacked up the prices of everything. If you've been out to the grocery store lately, somebody's getting rich, and it's not the average person. So that was also similar. And during this time, two new spiritualities came in the 13th and 14th century, big time, and they were the Franciscans and the Dominicans, St. Francis and St. Dominic. And these were different kinds of spiritualities. Uh, they were the Franciscans, Dominicans were in the middle of it. They were in the towns. They were in they weren't, it wasn't monastic. And so this was a big change too. And Meister Eckhart went into the Dominican order when he was 14, and he was brilliant. And so he's in the University of Paris. But then after he left there, he was basically a preacher. What we have are his sermons. And a little more about that in a minute. Also, there was in the 14th century, we have the pandemic. The Black Plague started. So many similarities to what's going on here, just in cultural and climate change and disease, corruption in high places. We had 2 or 3 popes, as I mentioned. The German Empire had no emperor. Our House of Representatives was vacant for, you wonder. Institutional greed was going on. The commandments were out the window. The one commandment was, show me the money in the church, the Catholic Church. Even the knighthood, and Dominic knew, or Meister Eckhart knew this, because he was in a family that was pretty well connected, and they were in this knighthood thing. The knights were supposed to protect damsels and people. Well, they morphed into something like the mafia. And so they were preying on the people. So that corruption in high places, I mean, it's very much a distant mirror of what's going on. Who can you trust? Now, in this environment, there was ferment, and there was radical spiritual movements came up. And the main one, there were many, too many to mention, but the main one was the Beguine and the Begad movement. The Beguines were the women and the Begads were the men, and it was very heavy in Meister Eckhart's Rhineland area and went all the way to the Low Countries, all the way to Holland. There's at some time probably maybe 300,000 of these people. Now the Beguines and the Begads were they were just working class people who wanted to have a spiritual life, and they weren't going to church to get it because it wasn't to be had there. And so they actually lived in common. You could see architectural drawings of the beguinages and the begadages, and they basically were in a kind of square with a center, and they lived in common, the women and then the men in the other, and then they worked in the world. They worked in society, but they found a kind of worship together. And this was breaking out at this time too. And this was a serious movement, and a very, very, probably 30,000 Beguines in the Rhineland when Meister Eckhart was out of the University of Paris. He was back, and he was prior of certain areas, and he was back giving his sermons. Now, part of what got him in trouble with the church is he gave sermons in the local vernacular in German, and that wasn't widespread in the church until the 1960s. So he gave sermons in German, strike one. Sermons were in Latin up to that point, which maybe if you're an Italian, maybe you could understand some of it, but in Germany. So they're giving sermons that nobody really understood. So he started giving it in German. And the second strike two was he gave it to women. So he went and did it in the Dominican nuns. And then strike three was he gave it to the Beguines, those women. Uh, and that's what got him into hot water most of all with the uh, institutional church and the Pope. But those sermons, thanks to those women, actually, the uh, the Dominican nuns and the Beguines, they wrote them all down. I mean, he was just giving the sermons. He was just bashing it out like this. This isn't written down. And the nuns were writing everything down. And that's why we have them today, and the Beguines as well. Now, the fourth, so radical movements there were sweeping through. And, you know, heart to heart is very much like a kind of setup that is where people are getting together for spirituality. We don't live in a beguinage or a begadage, but this is, this is a kind of new kind of movement for a reason. So this is I think there is a lot to say about it. And in the next weeks, we're going to get into his view of God was very different, which was probably strike 5 or 6. He saw God as more equally as feminine as masculine, and actually probably a little bit more, because his whole image was about we have to give birth to something, and we'll catch that in the poem. And finally, there was a spirit of despair and a kind of apocalyptical in the 14th century, especially when the Black Plague came through. And there was a phenomenon that we see in our culture in the 21st century. Men and women were deciding not to bring children into the world. Similar to, they have a name for these folks, and they're studying these folks, but people get married and they just decide this is too shaky, this is too dark. And there is a lot of despair, there is a lot of cynicism now, but people are saying, I don't know, I don't want to bring kids into this world. And that same phenomenon is on the horizon here in this time. So that's just a real quick glance. I'd really recommend that book if you like a good historical account of a century, because there's far more. It's really extensive how much alike we are. We're in a dark period. We didn't know who the president was. People, millions of people still think the wrong guy's in there. So, it's a time to hear this voice. Yeah. So that's just a little context for it. The poem I have today, which is a Christmas poem, in some form I probably have shared with you before, but I really didn't share the fact that it was. I better find it first. That it was. It was indebted to Eckhart. I'm going to have to find it for a minute. Yeah, I had even trouble getting in today. Maybe you did too, because Zoom is, anytime they do something new with Zoom, you have to jump through a lot of hurdles. So I'm trying to find my poem. It got wiped out, I think. Here we go. It's called A Perennial Christmas Wish. And the subtitle is After Meister Eckhart. He influenced us greatly. So here's the poem, and then we'll get to the sitting. We'll reflect on it a little bit, get to the sitting, but just let it come through, hit your ear, go from the ear to the heart and soul. A perennial Christmas wish is just this, to give birth. The Great Spirit will not rest until this birth is happening in you. But don't get busy trying to make something happen. Just relax. Let go of your need to make something happen. Just sit down in silence each and every day. Open your heart and breathe yes to letting the Great Spirit midwife your subtle soul into being. This is not the whole point of your existence, but it is the place to start. I mean, if you're not being born, You're busy dying. Yeah, I wrote that a few years ago, and it changes every year a little bit. But Meister Eckhart was always behind it. His image of birthing, uh, that's one of the images of a God that's different. And that's why he goes into the feminine. Because human beings, the woman birthed all of us. We all came out of a woman. And so he really saw a kind of balanced deity, and he saw the feminine energy as well as the masculine. Uh, and he said the Great Spirit will not rest until this birth is happening in you. Uh, yeah, that goes for people, single women, all men. That the fact that there's something to be born here in all of us. Uh, and he said, don't get busy trying to make something happen. Well, uh, this could actually cover people who are trying to actually get pregnant with a human child. They try and they try and they try. It's almost a given. They try and they try and they try, and then they even do fertilization stuff, and nothing happens, and so they just give up. And then they, maybe even they they go and adopt a kid, and then, but basically they give up trying to make something happen, and they relax from all that, and then the woman gets pregnant. It happens. And he's let go of your need to make something happen. Now this can, we're talking about birth in a real life. We're talking about birth in the essence of yourself, but living a real life. And we're all trying to make it happen. And he said, no, just relax. Uh, I'm going to read you a couple short poems in a book that you could, if you want to get a companion book for our next few weeks, this would be a good book. I'll read you a couple poems there. But just relax. Let go and let it be. Just let life be what it is. Trying to manipulate it. Really relax at a deep level. And then this is really segues us into meditation or contemplation. Just sit down in silence each and every day. Open your heart and breathe yes to letting the Great Spirit midwife your subtle soul into being. Your subtle soul is your essence, whatever that is, and there's no way to know it until it happens. And there's going to be no subtle soul that's just like yours. We're all unique in this view, and we're either going to become that absolutely unique human being in all the history of the world, or we're not. Now, in this case, Meister Eckhart was Christian, and so Jesus was that reminder that we all have this to do. He was like the reminder: you can do this. You can do this. Of course, there's in my own personal practice, there's the Buddha and Jesus. They're both telling you the same thing. You have to be yourself, and there's a way to do it. They both have different approaches, but these two, at least for me, are the reminders that we can all do this and we need to do this. And the poem ends, is not the whole point of your existence, but is the place to start. Now, we're going to develop that because Meister Eckhart had a different view of the whole spiritual journey and what it ends up with. And he sort of flipped it around, because even still today, a lot of people practicing spirituality think it's about some kind of breakthrough, and it is, but some kind of lights and rockets, and all of a sudden you're enlightened and all that. And on one level, that's true. So contemplation and meditation is part of it, but it's not the end of it. To be a great meditator is not the end of it. To have great experiences on the cushion is not the end of it. It leads to, from Eckhart's point of view, which is something just to take in, all this work we do, and really, you don't want to over complexify it. It's very simple. You just sit down, let go, and let everything be just the way it is, and relax totally. All this trying, and then something will be born. But that's not the point of it. The point of it is, as that develops and matures, just like any baby develops and matures, it leads to compassion. Contemplation is a means to the end, and the end is not to have visions and be walk around 6 inches off the ground. No, it's to develop compassion, which is a different kind of compassion. Means you have to be in the world. You have to have compassion for yourself, of course, but that's for this human self that's all messed up. See, so it's not the whole point of your existence, but it's a place to start. So we contemplate, we meditate to deliver the beginning of the thing, not the end. The end is, and this is unique, and I think it's something that worth dwelling on in the future weeks. That what grows from that self that's born is a compassionate self, a self that is in the mix of the suffering, and it's going to do something about it. You know. Now, yeah, that'll be in the screensaver, and the poem will be in on Monday. But this book here, if you can see it, it's called The Book of the Heart, and it's putting phrases from the incredible amount of sermons into poetic form by a couple of guys who are really Eckhart uh, masters. John Sweeney and Mark Burrows, they work together. Meditation, and the subtitle is Meditations for a Restless Soul. So I'm going to read you a couple of these short poems, and they've combed through the sermons, which are extensive. I recommend you get, and I'll give you other follow-up books after, but right in the beginning, and you can get a used copy of this, Meister Eckhart's Book of the Heart. But I just want to read you a couple of poems that'll lead us to the contemplation. This one's called Letting Go. I don't like the dark. I'd rather be clothed than naked. Yet you tell me I must let go of all that. I must let go of all that clothes me. My joys and fears, my worries, and even my imaginings, and give myself to the dark emptiness where you wait to be born in me. Just a little short. They're little short kinds of poems that are just basically they'll hit on a line that's just great in the whole sermon, and then they'll put it in a form, poetic form. I don't like the dark. I'd rather be clothed than naked. Yet you tell me I must let go of all that clothes me. My joys and fears, my worries, and even my imaginings, and give myself to the dark emptiness where you wait to be born in me. That's a really good guide to what we're doing when we sit. We're going into the dark. And then this one. This is when you get into Eckhart, all mystics, you get into paradox because of all of this. I mean, reality, even God, and you get into the paradox of God, him, or herself. And paradox can only be untangled by going deeper than the mind. And on the level of the mind, it's contradictory. It's got to be one or the other. But if you can go deep into the heart and to the depth of the soul, the depth itself, what was paradoxical up here, somehow begins to come clear. So this is called shining forth. So this is the opposite of the darkness. In times of doubt, I forget that you are not a God of thoughts to be found in concepts or theories, but are the source of my life and the radiance that shines forth in all that is. And then I remember, mine is the work of learning to see you as the radiance that shines forth in all that is, even in the dark, even in me. Brilliant, brilliant. See, so we got this, and this is, Christmas. The depth of Christmas is the light and the darkness, and that's why it's situated around the darkest time of the year. We don't know actually when Jesus was born. It wasn't in Christmas, probably. In times of doubt, I forget that you are not a God of thoughts to be found in concepts or theories, but are the source of my life and the radiance that shines forth in all that is. And then I remember, mine is the work of learning to see you as the radiance that shines forth in all that is, even in the dark, even in me. Brilliant, you that goes with one of my favorite. So this is Book of the Heart, Meister Eckhart, Sweeney, and Burroughs. These will feed you along the way as we reflect on this guy's teachings. You get the pith of them in that book. You know, as the Sufis' favorite saying, they say, well, one of their favorite sayings, they say, Muhammad, Allah spoke to Muhammad. He said, Muhammad, between you and me, there are 70,000 veils. Between me and you, there are none. And so the veils are these things that darken our perception to the point where we've even forgotten where we came from and where we're going. And when we end up just in the dark, just me, separate self. And the vision from the other way is, yeah, we're screwed up. We're a mess. We do awful things. But it's like the divinity doesn't see those. It sees the light that you are. The lamp, you can put a light under a bushel basket. That was one of Jesus's great. Why do you have the light under a bushel basket? So it's about light. One interesting thing about Eckhart is he doesn't talk about Christ much. He doesn't use that image or that word. And, it's good to remember Jesus wasn't a Christian. He never heard that word. It happened later. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew who was getting screwed around, just like many of us are getting screwed around by whatever government we live by. But he knew about light, and he had a different view about God. And I think Eckhart gets close, really close, to what Jesus saw, and also what Buddhists see. Toward the end of his life, Merton was reading two things. He was reading Buddhist texts, and he discovered Meister Eckhart. He was entranced by Eckhart. He thought he had read all the other mystics. They all have something great, but one of his, the way Merton talked, he says, hell, I don't know what Zen is, but Eckhart's got it. And so it's a very interesting statement that he saw this guy as Zen, and Merton's own journey of interfaith stuff, trying to find connections with the Buddhists as a Christian, as a Catholic monk, and he started all that. Really, he was in the forefront of that. If I were teaching on something on interfaith or interspirituality, he's the guy. He's the guy that I would have people reading. And there's a long list. We'll go into it as we go on, but there's a long list for everything from Carl Jung to Zen masters to Merton to Jewish Hasidic Jews who all thought Eckhart was like a bridge. Yeah. So anyway, there we are. So that's plenty to reflect on, and we've got a lot of. That's a gift. I felt that Eckhart was a gift to me during my recovery on the knee because I hadn't taken those books off the shelf in years, and I took them off, and man, they were new. They were new. Yeah. So they were a gift to me, so I'm passing it on. So let's go into silent meditation now, and again there'll just be a tone after 15 minutes. And then you can keep sitting, or you could write for 5 minutes. And even though Eckhart wrote plenty, but the main thing where he preached, he did this. He talked to people, and thank goodness, though, somebody wrote it down. We wouldn't have it. We wouldn't have it. So with that, we're just going to dive in. So if you go to meditation mode, contemplative mode, don't get too, as Eckhart would say, don't complicate it. This is the ultimately simplest thing you'll do in your day.